Hey guys, it's Frederik from the FWX podcast. I want to continue talking about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, especially with some much needed background for my coverage of the last two Avengers movies, Avengers Infinity War and Endgame. And I want to continue talking about the world inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I'm gonna do that by talking about this movie and this one as well, the two Black Panther movies, and then also someone that appears in Black Panther Wakanda Forever that right now has a series on Disney Plus that you can watch, and that is, of course, the highly critically acclaimed Ironheart. And so I've been watching this series and I want to talk about it, but before I do that, I have to, of course, start with the backstory of Riri Williams, aka Ironheart. And so I need to do that by covering the Black Panther movies first. And we'll do that. I will talk about the story. I'm gonna start with Black Panther, the first movie, of course. And so I'm gonna talk about the story, I'm gonna talk about the characters, I'm gonna refer to the actors in the cast photos of them. I will be descriptive as to who they are, because this movie is, especially the very first one, was a cultural high point for Marvel. This is arguably one of their best movies ever. And I fully agree with that. It's an incredible story, and so I'm gonna talk about that in a second. But first, I'm gonna give you a disclaimer before we go any further. So, as you know already, but I will say it again, I am not a original English speaker, and so I might on occasion still flub words. I might also swear on occasion, because sometimes I get ahead of myself, or I lose my train of thought, or I need to look something up that I haven't looked up already, and so I think that I got it and then I don't get it and I tend to swear or not. And sometimes it doesn't happen at all. That also happens. Also, for those same kinds of reasons, I might have an awkward pause. And also important to know is that what I'm reading is on the screen, which means that the screen will get brighter and I will get brighter as well. So, that's all of that out of the way. Let's talk about the Black Panther movie. And we start at the very beginning, of course. And this movie, like a couple of others, has a prologue. And we get the start of this movie with this prologue as a young boy asks his father to tell him a story. And the father begins to tell about how the country of Wakanda came about. And he tells that thousands of years ago, there were 5 tribes in Africa that were going at war with each other because a precious material crashed to the earth in a meteorite, and they all wanted to use it. And one of these people had someone step forward who ingested something called the heart-shaped herb, which got affected by this material that was in the meteorites, and that caused that person to gain superhuman abilities, and so became the first Black Panther. And all the other tribes joined, except for the Jabari tribe, and they formed the nation of Wakanda. And over centuries, the Wakandans used the vibranium in every single thing that they could, and they developed highly advanced technology. And they used the same technology to isolate themselves from the world, portray themselves as an underdeveloped country, as we would call in our own reality in this year. Sorry. And so that's a little interesting East prologue there that the father tells his son about. And so we cut back to, interestingly, a year that I find important. We go to 1992, which also happens to be the year I was born, but that's non-canonical in this series. So we meet the first people in this movie as the King of Wakanda, T'Chaka, who we have seen played in another movie already. I'm talking about Captain America Civil War, where unfortunately the Wakandan king is killed in the attack on the UN in Vienna. And he is played, I'm looking for the picture, by this gentleman right here, John Connie. He plays King T'Chaka. And he visits his brother, Njobu, in Oakland, California. And Njobu is played by another very well-known actor, Sterling K. Brown. And I've seen Sterling in a couple of things, including Person of Interest, where he played a role. And so does another person that I will talk about in a moment. And so the King of Wakanda visits his brother Njobu in Oakland, where he is working undercover. And T'Chaka is there with his personal guard, the Dora Milaje, an all-female bodyguard, a Secret Service kind of organization. And he arrives there to talk with his brother. And unfortunately, something has gone awry earlier. And T'Chaka comes to visit his brother to talk about this. And he accuses his own brother of assisting someone called Ulysses Claw, who is a black market arms dealer, who has gotten away with stealing vibranium from Wakanda. And I've talked about vibranium before, because in the Captain America movies, the shield that Steve Rogers holds and uses as a weapon is made of vibranium. And so in Wakanda they have a lot more of that. And so this Ulysses Claw character got away with just a smidge, a portion of the vibranium that they have. And Ulysses Claw, as we later see in this movie, is played by one of my favorite actors of all time. And you don't see his name, Ulysses Claw, in this picture, but here he is. It's this guy, Andy Serkis, who, of course, is best known for his role as Gollum and Smeagol in the Lord of the Rings movies. He also has done a number of other motion cap and voice acting works, for instance King Kong in the Peter Jackson movie as well. He also portrayed Snoke in the latest Star Wars films. He is an amazing actor that I cannot get enough of. And this movie is chock full of actors that I can't get enough of. And they'll prove it one by one in this movie. And so T'Chaka and Njobu talk, as T'Chaka is accusing his own brother of working with Ulysses Claw. And Jobu and T'Chaka are actually not alone. There's another person with them there, and that is Zuri. That is another Wakandan who has come, who is staying in Oakland, but actually he is revealed to be another undercover Wakandan that T'Chaka had sent to check on his own brother. And Zuri, in this moment, is seen through the eyes of somebody else, a younger person, because this takes years back. This takes years before the moments we see in this movie. And I do not have a picture of the younger person, but I will talk about the older Zuri in a moment, because he is played by another incredible actor. And so Zuri confirms to T'Chaka that yes, and Jobu did help Ulysses Claw. And unfortunately, the king has only one way of dealing with this kind of problem, and he kills his own brother for betraying Wakanda and working with Ulysses Claw. And they cover this up for years and years. And so we get to the heart of the story now. In the present day, right after King T'Chaka has been killed at the UN by Baron Zemo, who used the likeness of Bucky Barnes to frame him for what happened, for the death of those people in the UN, including King T'Chaka. And we see the ship that the Wakandans use to travel around the world as it returns to Wakanda, and we create incredible shots of highly likely CGI here as the ship comes home with our main character, of course, Prince T'Challa, as he is moments away from becoming king himself because of the successor line, of course. And two people aboard the ship are, of course, Mr. Black Panther himself, Mr. Chadwick Boseman, and you can see right here. And also, we see Okoye, who is the general and the head of the Dora Milaje, who is played by another incredible actor, Denai Guerrera. I hope I said her name correctly. This one right here. Okay. And you will also know Denai from her role in The Walking Dead. I'm gonna look this up just in case. Because I want to be sure about it. So yeah, she did play in The Walking Dead. That's good. And of course other stuff too, like the later MCU movies that I've talked about before. Alright. And she's an American actor. So was Chadwick too, by the way. Okay. And so they come home to Wakanda. But before this happens, they get an alert from the Wakandan authorities that there is someone that they need to go and pick up, and that is Nakia, who is T'Challa's ex-girlfriend, because she's on an undercover assignment. And Nakia is played by another incredible actress, and that is this woman right here, Lupita Nyong'o, who you will also know from, for instance, a voice role in The Wild Robot, where she played the Wild Robot herself. I'm gonna look up her for another moment because I want to be sure about things. Because I do think I know her from something else as well. Oh, yeah. There's another incredible movie from years ago called 12 Years a Slave, where she played a role, of course. And also her work with Jordan Peele in Us. And then also a couple of years ago, she played another action role in the 355 movie. And she also has an Oscar already. And that was for her role in 12 Years a Slave. Yeah. Okay. Let's continue with the story. So, T'Challa and Okoye go and get Nakia from her undercover assignment, and we get to see the action that we've already seen from Civil War in this moment as T'Challa performs decently in his role as the Black Panther. Okay. And so we get a lot of action here with T'Challa as he dispatches these, I think they're just mercenaries, and that goes quickly, that goes fluently. And so Nakia goes with Okoye and T'Challa to Wakanda so she can be present for the ceremony where T'Challa will be crowned king. And we get the build up to the ceremony, and we see T'Challa meet his family as he returns from being abroad. And we meet up with two people that are important to him, that are very important to him, and that is his mother, Queen Ramonda, who is played by the incredible Angela Bassett, who I should have a picture of here. I'll briefly use another one. Here she is. That's her right there. That's Angela Bassett. Incredible actress. Who especially shines in the second movie, but here she already does decent job. And of course, we also meet Shuri, who is T'Challa's younger sister and a real technological mastermind, a genius, who is played in this movie and the second one by Letitia Wright, a British actress. That's her right there. And she's mostly known for this role. She's definitely been in some other roles that I unfortunately do not know. Okay. And we get to see them return. We get to see Okoye and T'Challa arrive in Wakanda. They meet up with his mother and his sister. And we get to build up to the ceremony. And at the ceremony, there is there's a specific part that needs to happen, and that is what the Jabari tribe calls Challenge Day, where somebody can go and challenge the would-be king in that moment. And so somebody does step up, and that is M'Baku, the leader of the Jabari tribe, who is played by this gentleman right here, Winston Duke, who I've seen in that show I mentioned a moment ago, Person of Interest, where he also played a role. And they have a fight, they have ritual combat to see who is the better fit to be king. And it's a kind of they really need to prove themselves, basically, especially T'Challa himself, because for this occasion he gets his. You just saw some sweat from me. Sorry for that. Which actually leads me right into this moment, because we get that ritual combat, and it's a real hassle for T'Challa because he gets his special abilities from the heart-shaped herb stripped away by the person I also mentioned before, who I now want to talk about because we get to see another famous actor in the role of a grown-up Zuri, the person that was present all those years ago when King T'Chaka confronted his brother Njobu. And Zuri is played by another famous black actor, of course, and that is Forrest Whitaker. You can see right here. I know him mostly from this role, but I've also seen him play an incredible part in the film The King of Scotland with James McAvoy. And he's also known from so many other roles, of course, including another project that I've talked about, that being Andor, where he plays the rogue general on the Jedi side. I'm gonna have to get that one for a moment. I'm gonna keep talking while I do this for a second, because just a second, folks. Just a second. Oh yeah, I know the name now. Saw Gerrera is the person he plays. The very high, out of his mind, paranoid rogue general on the side of the Resistance and the Jedi. Yeah. So Forrest is an incredible actor in many roles. The ones I know were Saw Gerrera in the Star Wars movies, and then of course that role in The King of Scotland. And so he is the ceremonial master and person leading the ceremony. I just said the same thing too, in two different ways. Anyway, okay, and so he's the one that has to take the benefit of the heart-shaped herb for a moment from T'Challa, and T'Challa and M'Baku have their fight to see who it would be the better fit to be king of Wakanda. And it's a bit of a clinch because M'Baku is obviously a very gifted fighter and strong leader. And despite being taller and stronger, he does. They kind of have a stalemate, but also not, as well. T'Challa proves that he is a very gifted fighter as well, being the Black Panther, despite being stripped of those abilities in this moment. And so he wins this fight, and he becomes the new king of Wakanda. And he does this in the fashion that we've come to know from this movie, by crossing his arms and shouting out, "Wakanda forever." And T'Challa also persuades M'Baku to yield, because he also understands the responsibility that he has towards his people, the Jabaris. And we cut away to a place in London, a museum, where we meet up with Ulysses Claw. We've also talked about Enough now, played by Andy Serkis, as he meets up with another vital person to this movie, and that is Eric Stevens, played by our antagonist in this movie, the main antagonist, played by Michael B. Jordan, who you know from many other roles, including The Wire. And I will be honest, I haven't seen as much other roles from him before, but I did very much like him in this role as Eric Stevens, or Eric Killmonger. And so he is an American. He is a son, in fact, of Njobu, who had a child with an American woman. And so we meet Eric Stevens in the flesh in London as he is checking out some artifacts that are in this museum, and he shows off his skills as a former soldier and special forces and CIA agent, I will say. And he manages to pre-poison the person that's come to inspect the things that he wants to talk about, which is the museum's curator, and he uses that moment of the poisoning to get the EMTs into the building, and as they get close enough, this becomes a crime scene because the curator and a couple of security guards that have come to inspect what is happening are killed by the EMTs. And one of those EMTs is Mr. Andy Serkis as Ulysses Claw again. And we see a little interesting thing here where he says to one of them, like, you can go much further. And the security guard does do that, and then when he's far enough away, he does get killed by Ulysses Claw with a bullet in the back of the head. Because, as Ulysses Claw says, makes us look like amateurs. And, by the way, I should mention for a brief second here that Ulysses Claw is supposed to be South African, because he has that specific accent in this movie. And so, one of the items that Eric Stevens wants in here is actually of Wakandan origin. And so that means that there's vibranium in this item, which allows him a way to trace the vibranium back to Wakanda. And we meet up back in Wakanda with T'Challa and Okoye. Specifically Okoye's husband, Wakabi, who is played in this movie also by another incredible actor named Daniel Kaluuya. That's this gentleman right here. And he's also known for his other roles in Jordan Peele movies, like Get Out, for instance. Okay. And so they meet up, T'Challa meets up with Wakabi as they're outside talking about, well, specifically a giant rhino that Wakabi has been has tamed and raised to the age that he is now. And then they get information from Okoye through the technology that the Wakandans have, which is through a bracelet built of beads. And they get the information that Claw has surfaced up in London, as he has just helped the guy out. And this results into a mission with T'Challa and Okoye and also Nakia as they travel to Busan in South Korea, where during the information that they got from Okoye, learned that he plans to sell this vibranium artifact to someone of the CIA, and we get another person that is an incredible actor. Like I said before, this movie is just chock full of incredible, talented actors. But I have to mention this guy also because he is one of my other favorite actors from one of my favorite movies of all time, and that is another person from the Lord of the Rings cast. And I am, of course, talking about this man, Mr. Martin Freeman, who played Bilbo in the Hobbit movies, of course. He's also known for other roles. But I am always enamored when I see that guy on a screen because he is just incredibly good. Also, he does a very acceptable American accent in this movie. And that is because he works for the CIA. He's Everett K. Ross, who is an important side character for Black Panther in the Marvel Comics. And in this moment, he is working for the CIA. He was also a former pilot in the Army, which will come into play later when I'm talking about that part. And so, Claw wants to sell the vibranium artifact that he has to him specifically, to Ross from the CIA. And they have a back and forth, which is amazing, of course, to see those two guys play off each other, to see Andy Serkis and Martin Freeman face off, because, of course, they're very much well known from those other two parts I just have already talked about, that being Smeagol and Gollum for Andy Serkis and Bilbo Baggins for Martin Freeman. And I will always remember those moments, but here they do another interesting one of them as they just do what they do best. And I'm gonna mention something else here for a moment. One of the incredible parts of this movie is the music. And so one of the people working on the music production for this movie is another incredible artist, and that is, of course, Kendrick Lamar. And he provided a lot of the music in this movie, including one of his own songs, and that is, of course, Pray For Me. That it is not one of his songs, but he helped on the production. And that is a song from The Weeknd, the Canadian singer-songwriter, R&B singer-songwriter, with production from Kendrick Lamar at the same time. And so we get to hear Pray For Me in this moment as it plays in the background, as the supposed arrangement between Ulysses Claw and Everett Ross turns into a firefight because the Wakandans show up and they don't really know how to deal in these kinds of situations because they stand out like a sore thumb. We do get a moment with T'Challa and Everett Ross, of course, as he's trying to get this piece of vibranium back while Ross is trying to get out. And this results in Claw seeing T'Challa and the other two Wakandans, Okoye and Nakia. And so a firefight breaks out as bullets go around, and we get to see the Wakandans in their element as well because they're incredible fighters. We see Nakia as a war dog, which is a kind of spy kind of role for the Wakandans, and General Okoye in her role with a advanced spear in action. And it's an incredible sequence, very good action moment. And here we also learn that Ulysses Claw has traded one of his past, I'm going to say it a bit differently, Ulysses Claw turns out to be already half cyborg, as he uses a defunct arm completely made of vibranium into a gun that can shoot energy. And he has that funny, there's a funny moment in this action scene where he shoots up the, I'm just gonna call it a slot from a casino, as T'Challa is holding it up to protect himself from getting hit by this cannon, energy cannon that Claw is using, and so a lot of money goes flying. And of course he jokes that I made it rain. By the way, if you want, sound off in the comments if I do a respectable South African accent or not. But please be friendly when you do that. Okay. And so this leads to outside, as Claw flees by car. And we get the three Wakandans, Okoye, Nakia, and T'Challa on the way to intercept Claw. And we get a chase scene, and we get another song from Kendrick Lamar on the background, and that is, in this moment, The King's Dead, from this album for this movie. And that is another great song, of course. It plays well in the background. And while Nakia and Okoye are together in a car, and they comment, kind of like commentary in a YouTube video on what they have to deal with. For instance, Okoye says, "Guns, so uncivil." I hope I said that right. And so they mess up the cars of Claw's convoy as he's trying to get away, while T'Challa is going after Claw himself, while Shuri uses a system that she has designed where she can remotely activate the car that T'Challa is using to get around. And ultimately it leads to T'Challa catching Claw, only for him to not kill Claw, as a lot of people gather around, and T'Challa, while he still wants revenge for what Claw did to his father and for stealing the vibranium so many years ago, gives him to the CIA so they can interrogate him, so they can know how he got that last piece of vibranium that he recently got. And so we get Claw in Ross's custody, and we get the interrogation scene between Ross and Claw, which is another moment for me to marvel at, pun intended, of those two Tolkien white boys, as they're also called in the behind the scenes of this all, as they face off against each other. And Claw tries to convince Ross that Wakanda is really a very much a technological advanced nation that is projected by an image of a country like any other third world country. For instance, Claw says that for years people have been looking for El Dorado, being a city of gold, and people always thought that that was supposed to be in the Americas, plural of course, because it could have been in Middle America or Southern America, South America, or maybe just in North America. But all this time it has been in Africa, supposedly, according to him. And that the Wakandans have been sitting on a giant pile of vibranium for so long, and that they've only barely scratched the surface of what is this huge deposit of a meteoroid from far away that has specific powers if you embed it in the right kind of way, technologically or in clothing or in manufacturing, and that everything that they have is run by it. And to be honest, he's kind of telling the truth. But of course, Ross has this projected view of what the world is through his eyes as an agent for the CIA and as a former uh, military man himself. Yeah. So basically, kind of like your subtle brainwashing by American and Western standards is what he has. Basically, the Wakanda is a front for a technologically advanced civilization. While this is all happening, we get the scenes between Okoye and T'Challa as they're discussing in their native tongue how to get Claw either out of there and bring him alive back to Wakanda, or to kill him and deliver him to Wakanda. And while this is also happening, we get Eric Stevens as he assaults the station of the CIA with his two cohorts, the woman and the man that helped him get that piece of vibranium out of the London Museum. And so he assaults that station in Korea, and he manages to get Claw out of there, away from the CIA and from the claws of the Black Panther, as he uses our modern day assault weaponry. And of course, I'm talking about like an M4 with grenade launcher part, because that is exactly what we see in the action movie part of this too, as he just blasts the Black Panther with a grenade from his weapon, as T'Challa is trying to get him. And also in that moment, T'Challa notices something that this guy has, which is like a ring in a necklace around his neck that he thinks he has seen before. By the way, I've been talking about all these characters, but I briefly want to point out for a moment what they look like. So, of course, I've been talking about T'Challa, that's our main guy here, right here. You have Killmonger, that is this guy right here. You have Queen Ramonda, that's her right here. This is Princess Shuri. This is Nakia. This is Okoye. Here is Ulysses Claw, played by Andy Serkis, along with God damn it, his name. Martin Freeman as Everett K. Ross. We also have Forrest Whitaker as Zuri, and of course M'Baku, played by Winston Duke. So, wanted to point out for a moment what they all look like, because I've been talking about the characters like you know what they look like, so now you do know what they look like. So, that's that. I'm gonna drink for a moment. Because right now it is hot in Belgium. You may have noticed that there's a fucking heat wave going on in Europe right now. If you're watching from here in Europe, or from somewhere else, if it's from a Western nation or not, that doesn't really matter all that much to me from where you're watching. You're all welcome to me. You're all welcome to watch this episode of the FWX podcast. So, let's continue with the story. And so, as we get the action of this moment, we also get a moment with Ross as he has jumped in front of Nakia to protect her, and he is gravely injured. He gets a bullet in the back, which is close to killing him, in fact. And Nakia tells this to T'Challa, as there's only one way for him to stay alive, and that is if they take him to Wakanda with them. And so T'Challa decides to do this as a stint of his own levity. And maybe I used that wrong, but what I mean is that it is the right thing to do for them to take care of those who are wounded in their actions, because they don't want to create any more bigger consequences than what is already happening, because that is in effect what Eric Stevens, aka Killmonger, is. He is the consequences of the actions from the past. And actually this ties directly into the theme of this movie, because it's all about legacy. It is all about also daddy issues, of course. Because T'Challa wants to be a rightful king and be a good son to his now deceased father. Same thing with our antagonist, with Eric Stevens himself. With Killmonger, he wants to do right by his pops, who believed that we've been part of a minority for so long and we need to change something about that. And so this movie is all about legacy and about the ties we have to family and what we owe our family. Okay, so they take Ross back to Wakanda so he can be treated. And by the way, as he returns and we get to see Shuri with Ross, she has that line, "Another broken white boy for us to heal," which refers to Bucky Barnes, who has been on ice in Wakanda because he doesn't trust himself with killing anybody anymore. So that's what she's referring to. And while she's looking after him while working on her work, T'Challa confronts Zuri about his uncle, about Njobu, because he did see, as I said, that ring as a necklace around that guy's neck. And so Zuri explains what he was doing in Oakland in 1992. And he tells that your uncle T'Challa became disillusioned with the isolationism that we practice here in Wakanda. And he wanted to share the technology of Wakanda with people from African descent so they could overcome their oppressors. Hopefully with the assistance from Ulysses Claw. And so he keeps telling about his side of things. And so Njobu got mad in that moment because I was looking over him, finding out what he was doing. And he attacked me, Zuri says to T'Challa. And Njobu attacked me, which forced T'Chaka, your father, to kill him, to kill his own brother. And your father also instructed me to vanish the claim that Njobu had and leave behind the child that he had in America, as he became aware of what was happening in the parts of America when it came to especially racism. And so he had to leave his son, whose Wakandan name is N'Jadaka. N'Jadaka. That he had to leave that boy behind. And so that boy, N'Jadaka, grew up to be Eric Stevens, who, and we get a scene where Everett Ross wakes up and he talks to Shuri about where he is, and he's not fully aware about what exactly happened, except that he did catch that bullet for Nakia, and he's kind of inquisitive about what is happening. Well, not really inquisitive, more questioning of what is happening, because he didn't think he would survive that bullet wound, but he did, because they used Wakandan vibranium technology to save him. And so he has that talk with Shuri, and with him there, he can now give the information about Eric Stevens, and he tells T'Challa and Shuri, and I think also Okoye, about what has happened with Eric Stevens, with N'Jadaka, the supposed other heir that the Wakandan throne has. And so Ross tells them that Eric Stevens got into the American army and became very well known for being an absolute badass in the army. He became a Navy SEAL, and he started to help out with Black Ops especially. And because he was so good at his job and killed so many people, that he took on the nickname of Killmonger. And they get all that information from Ross. And we get cut back actually to Killmonger as he and his girl that helped him get that thing from the museum in London, as they face off with Claw, who has his own ideas of dealing with this. And so the group breaks off, and we get a little action scene where Killmonger hunts after Claw, as he has his own plans for what to do with the opportunity that he now has. And so he kills his own girl, and she's okay with it because she believes in the cause. And so he does that, and he ambushes Claw, who's gone away. And in the confrontation, he shows Claw that he has the access to get into Wakanda, and the access is in the inside of his lip, which is in high-tech blue letters, which reveals to Claw that, this isn't just some angry black kid trying to get at me for doing something awful. This is someone with a righteous claim, basically. And because he now knows all of that, Killmonger kills him, which also plays into what he wants to do. And so he bags up the dead Claw and delivers him to the Wakandans at the border. And he is presented to the leaders of Wakanda. And first he meets up at the border with the border tribe, which is led by Wakabi, that is Daniel Kaluuya's character, of course. This gentleman right here. And which leads him to the elders of the tribes, the leaders of the tribes that settle that are representatives of their tribes, and they form kind of a council that is, I would say they're kind of like the council in the Game of Thrones series, yeah, where they give advice and also vie for their own power. But that's just in Game of Thrones. I'm talking about a more advisory kind of council where they give their opinion and their advice to the king. Yeah. So that leads Njidaka to the throne room, and here he presents himself not as an American operative, but as someone with a righteous claim, revealing himself to be Njidaka, the son of Njobu, the brother of King T'Chaka, and he asserts his claim that he wants the throne. And so Killmonger challenges T'Challa to a ritual combat, in the same way that we saw earlier with T'Challa and M'Baku. And despite some discussion and argumenting in the throne room, T'Challa ultimately complies and says, "Yes, I will fight you, nephew." And so they face off in that same incredible waterfall sequence that we saw earlier from the ritual combat. And T'Challa is once again stripped of his abilities with the heart-shaped herb, which makes him the Black Panther, only for things to really turn around in this moment as Eric Stevens or Njidaka, or one of his other names, proves that he's just about as cunning and skillful a fighter as his nephew too, and in fact is better, is stronger, because he defeats T'Challa. And he yells to everybody else that is present that, "Is this your king? Is this your king? Is this your king?" He says those words to everybody else that is present. That includes everyone on T'Challa's side. You know, everyone that we see in this picture right here. Except, of course, for those two white guys, of course. And the ceremonial leader, Zuri, steps in here by saying that your quarrel is not with T'Challa. Your quarrel is with me. I exposed your father for what he was. And in that moment, of course, Njidaka, Eric Stevens, or Killmonger, whatever name you want to use here, does do that, and he kills Zuri. He takes him to the place where no one can follow. The afterlife. And I briefly want to mention here that in Wakandan culture, death is not the last part, as T'Challa says in the Civil War movie, where he meets up with the Black Widow, and he has those words about what it's really like to die, where you step into the veldt of Bast, and I think there's an interesting and beautiful dialogue between the two of them, between the Black Widow and the Black Panther, about what it's like to go into the afterlife. From the Civil War movie, that ties in to what is about to happen here as Njidaka defeats T'Challa. And he says those words I just said before, but I'll say one more. He says, "Is this your king?" Shaming and humiliating T'Challa. And he seemingly kills him by throwing him off the cliff into the water, as he has damaged T'Challa by doing it the way he was trained to, by attacking the weak points, going after T'Challa's legs and his limbs. Yeah, same thing. Anyway, So this leads to Killmonger, who now gets the powers of the heart-shaped herb from the person that will be a successor to Zuri. And we get a couple more scenes with him, including what I just mentioned about the afterlife, as getting when you're ingested with the heart-shaped herb, you get a moment of the plane to the next life, and we see Eric when he was younger. Thought for a moment. Anyway, so we get that moment with him as he talks with a younger version of his father, the Sterling K. Brown version of Njobu, as they talk about what he's doing, what he really wants. And as he comes out of this, and is now also not just King of Wakanda, but also the new Black Panther, he tasks the people responsible for gathering the other heart-shaped herb that it all needs to go. A kind of Kylo Ren moment for N'Jadaka as he commands the people tending to the heart-shaped herb to burn it all. And of course, while that is all happening, Shuri and Ramonda are dealing with the after effects of T'Challa being dead. And they meet up with Nakia, who says, "We need to get out of here. We need to get you safe, T." And they are about to go with also Ross, who is going with them to the Jabari terrain to get help from him. And while they're heading out, I'm gonna show her again. Nakia comes by the part where they're burning all the heart-shaped herb plants and gets the final one with her. And also we get this incredible shot as N'Jadaka, or Eric Stevens, is looking over all the burning plants, and it's a brilliant shot, despite it being a very bad moment, of course, because this shouldn't be happening anyway. But he wants to rule himself. So that's the whole point. Like, burn the world so I can rule it. You have to break the old world to make a new world. Kind of the same idea that Ultron had in Age of Ultron, which I covered in another video. If you want, you can go and watch that video too. And so Eric meets up the next day with Wakabi and his border tribe army as they are preparing to distribute Wakandan weapons to everywhere that people could rebel. But before that happens, we get another council scene with the elders of the tribes, and they confer about what is happening. And of course, Okoye, despite being a staunch T'Challa, despite being loyal to T'Challa, she kind of has to stay neutral as the person in charge of the army of Wakanda. And so Eric Stevens and N'Jadaka relies on Wakabi to deal with the problem of getting weaponry to everywhere that people could rise up and overtake their suppressors and oppressors. which gets us also to a scene with Okoye and Nakia, where Okoye explains that while my heart is with you, and that's a literal quote here, I need to stay here. I can't be seen fleeing. And so while she stays, Nakia, Shuri, and Ramonda, and Ross go to the Jabaris, and they meet up with M'Baku, of course, played by Winston Duke. And M'Baku has something to tell them. And also, the Jabaris reside in an area way more mountainous than where the capital city of Wakanda is, and so Maccabi, Maccabi. I'm mixing two names here. And Baku is very weary of everything that happens, but he respects T'Challa, of course, for letting him live despite losing the ritual combat from earlier. But so he has something to show them, which is T'Challa himself, as he's clinging to life despite being very, very wounded from what happened with Njidaka and so he's in a comatose state, covered by snow, which allows him to stay alive for as long as possible. And so Shuri, Ramonda, and Nakia tend to T'Challa as they try and wake him up by using, of course, the heart-shaped herb that Nakia gathered from the place where that was usually housed, while M'Baku is looking over Ross, who obviously has some distaste for, and I will keep it at that. Okay. So T'Challa, clinging to life, is given the last heart-shaped herb, and he gets that same afterlife moment with his father on a more savannah plains-like area where he sees all the past kings of Wakanda. And he becomes very argumentative with his father as they talk, that your actions led to consequences in our present world, father, and now I have to deal with your problems. And T'Challa's willingness and passion to fix this leads him to say to, especially his father, but also the other kings, that they were wrong for being so pushy against sharing not just what they have, but being what's the right word for staying on your own and not sharing anything. And I don't just mean isolationism, by the way, kind of relevant in our present world with another very advanced supposed country. And so that passion that erupts from T'Challa wakes him up, and that leads him to a meeting with M'Baku, And the whole reason why the Jabaris kept T'Challa alive is because M'Baku was okay with repaying T'Challa for sparing M'Baku's life during the ritual combat that they had earlier. And so they start to plan out a what would be the right word here? It's not really a takeover. It's reclaiming what is theirs. So T'Challa is now outfitted with a newer suit that he had previously, but now up to the customs of today and as a more advanced suit that we've actually seen earlier. Because there's a scene I didn't tell you about yet where T'Challa met up with Shuri, with his sister, as he got a more accurate for the times suit. And so he uses this again in this moment as he gathers the troops, basically. Yeah. And we get a scene with Wakabi and Killmonger as they're sending out the first flights with weaponry, while Shuri and Ross are sneaking back into the place where they are doing this from. And on his arrival, T'Challa breaks one of those ships and he shows up to face off with Killmonger. And I'm gonna drink for a moment because it's hot here. Alright. And this causes a huge fight, a battle to break out as Shuri and Ross get into the place to gather things, and Ross gets his moment as a former pilot so he can go after those other flights that are getting out of there with their distribution of weapons to places where people could rise up to their oppressors and suppressors in a very high not high profile, but I wanted to say a kind of sci-fi aspect of flying, as everything assembles around him like nanotech basically, and he's supposed to go after those flights. And by the way, I want to point something else out here. So Shuri being a genius means that she has developed an AI that helps her out with things, and that AI is named Griot. And there's another incredibly talented person that voices this figure, this AI Griot, and that is Trevor Noah from The Daily Show and his own podcast now. And he voices Griot, while we get the scenes with Ross as he is going after the flights with the weaponry. And so we get scenes with them, scenes with Everett Ross, with Martin Freeman going after those flights, in between the fight that is breaking out with the Dore Milaje will finally betray Killmonger and they fight him. But yeah, being former military and former Black Ops means that this is a real challenge for them. And unfortunately, several of them die fighting Killmonger, while Wakabi and his men are going after T'Challa on the battlefield. And same thing for Nakia and for Shuri, as they first go after Killmonger, who has now also donned a Black Panther kind of suit, which which he has with more golden necklace in a contrast to T'Challa's black necklace that gives him the suit of the Black Panther. Yeah. And so we have a large battle between the Dora Milaje troops and Wakabi's men, which is an interesting play because the two heads of those organizations and armies are spouses, in fact. And so we get that battle. We get some interesting scenes. You see T'Challa use the kinetic energy that is part of him, of the suit, basically, because it's so highly advanced that he can use the attacks against him into energy and disperse it into a force field, kind of. And so while T'Challa is fighting Wakabi's army, and things become slimmer and slimmer as they fight, and the Dora Milaje they are kind of losing against Killmonger. We finally get the arrival of another army, and that is the Jabari with M'Baku at the head of it, as they're fighting, and as things start to look dire for the Wakabi's men now, and once again played by these gentlemen. I'll show them again. So we have Michael B. Jordan as Killmonger. We have Chadwick as Black Panther. Letitia Wright as Shuri. You have Okoye here. You have Winston Duke as M'Baku. And then Daniel Kaluuya as Wakabi. And of course, also important, Martin Freeman as Everett Ross, as he's going after those flights with the weapons. And so we get a contrast and a constant montage of the action that is happening until finally the battle stops with Wakabi giving up and getting his men to lay down their weapons, as they are now losing. And so as the Dora Milaje start to lose to Killmonger, they disperse themselves to the battlefield to help out. But that leads Nakia and Shuri to fight him for a moment, showing off their skills until they also not lose to him, but are pushed aside, really, because he is just a badass fighter. And until T'Challa steps in and he gets it's such a choice between saying either Eric Stevens or Killmonger or N'Jadaka. So I'll say it different for a moment. So as it all boils down, T'Challa gets N'Jadaka, his nephew, into the place where everything is making the vibranium with the trains at the bottom. And so they fight midair as they fall, showing off just how gifted of a fighter they are, trying to get each other. And while this is happening, we see the last moments that Ross has, as there is another flight trying to shoot up the place where he is piloting this remote ship from. And ultimately he finally fights and takes out that last ship that he needed to get. As we get Griot constantly saying, like, the glass is at this percentage and it's going down constantly. Until finally he gets out of there, having destroyed that last ship. Well, he's in trouble as well. Okay. And what really ends the battle is that Wakabi. By the way, there's a reason why I mentioned that rhino from before. So the rhinos are specifically raised in to be a force in battle, and so they come into play in these scenes too on the battle scene outside. Um, but the last one that Wakabi, by the way, is on top of stops discreetly as it sees the spouse of his master. And that finally leads Wakabi to lay down his arms and his army to lay down their arms. Yeah. Meanwhile, we have T'Challa fighting Killmonger as they fall to uh, the train at the bottom of the pit where the vibranium is being gathered. And another interesting detail from before, as I was talking about Shuri and Ross meeting for the first time, he was asking about the technology that holds up those trains. And that everything is made out of vibranium. And there's an element of the train, of the trails that they're on, that keeps them from not going over and basically affecting the vibranium around. And so Eric and T'Challa fall on this thing, on the trails, while those things are working. And they show off just how good they are in the fight, of course, until ultimately T'Challa gets the upper hand as Eric tries to cheat out of the fight by trying to drive a knife of vibranium into T'Challa's heart. But T'Challa dismantles this weapon from Killmonger and fatally stabs him with it. And also he has that line where he says that was one hell of a move. And T'Challa, he did not want to do it, but he did. And actually, there's another brief moment here where it says, like, maybe we can still heal you. But Killmonger says, no, I don't want to be your slave. I don't want to be a martyr, is what I mean with that. I don't want to be hauled somewhere. And so he says a line from earlier, also important for this last moment, that my daddy said that the upcoming sun, the horizon, the sunset. I'm butchering the line here, but it basically comes down to that. I'm gonna look up for a moment because I want to get that line right. Just a second. I want to get that line right that he says. Yeah, so T'Challa says we can still heal you. And Killmonger says, why? So you can lock me up? Nah, just bury me in the oceans if my ancestors would jump from ships. Because they knew death was better than bondage. Just a second. No, I'm not gonna find it. So, what the what Njidaka, Eric Stevens, or Killmonger, whoever you want to call him, and those are all valid names, of course, is saying is that he wants to see the sun one last time before he goes. That's what he's actually saying. And so T'Challa helps him up, and they get to a plateau into the mountain where they can see the sun. And now that he's finally see it, and Njidaka decides that he can die in peace. And so he pulls a dagger out of his heart and he dies peacefully. Glad that he finally saw what he had always wanted to see, despite his plans not coming to fruition. And so the sunset, that was what I meant. So, okay, anyway. We get a couple of scenes before this movie ends, including T'Challa and Shuri as they meet up in Oakland, where T'Challa set something up that we see in the comics actually, where he wants to set up an outreach center so that people can learn more about Wakanda. Because he decides and realizes that people should know more about Wakanda. Unfortunately, he does not know yet that it's going to bite him in the ass later. But it's a good idea for people to know more about the nation of Wakanda. And we get a scene with Shuri, a follow-up scene with Shuri here as a bunch of kids see the ship that they have come with come to Earth, because it has an anti-gravity kind of technology that allows it to be floating into the air. And so she lets it down, and the kids from the area, from the neighborhood, see this, and they're of course very curious exactly about what it is, and she tells them about it. And to end this movie, we get a mid-credits scene with T'Challa, where he appears in front of the United Nations to reveal the truth of Wakanda to the world. And he has this incredible speech. And I will say this for you right now. Wakanda will no longer watch from the shadows. We cannot. We must not. We will work to be an example of how we, as brothers and sisters on this earth, should treat each other. Now, more than ever, the illusions of division threaten our very existence. We all know the truth. More connects us than separates us. But in times of crisis, the wise build bridges, while the foolish build barriers. We must find a way to look after another, as if we were one single tribe. And that is, of course, a very thoughtful message to the world. And that is an incredible speech, incredible dialogue in the script from this movie that came out all the way back in 2018. But personally, I also think it's still relevant to our current world now in 2025, given everything that is happening. And so I want to end this episode of the FWX podcast about the Black Panther movie here with one last thing, as we get one last post-credits scene where Shuri is helping out Bucky Barnes with his rehabilitation. And so I want to thank you for listening and watching to this episode of the FWX podcast. You can like this video, you can subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content. You can also share this with friends from work or your family or people here online on YouTube. You can let me know what you think about all of this in the comments, but please be civil and friendly about it. And so I want to thank you one last time for all of that, and also for the growth that the channel is seeing. And so I want to thank you. This is the very last time for all of that. And I will see you in the next episode of the FWX podcast. I'm Frederik. See you in the next video.